Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the thick, humid green of a forgotten jungle. You move carefully through vines that tug at your clothes, and the air presses down, heavy and damp. Your steps crunch against soil that feels older than time itself. And then, just ahead, something impossible emerges from the shadows. An enormous head, taller than you, carved out of stone, its wide lips pressed tight, its eyes fixed somewhere past you, into eternity. It looks like it has been waiting for you, staring from the earth for thousands of years. You swallow hard, because let's be honest, if one of these stone giants came to life and asked you to fetch it a cup of cacao, you probably wouldn't survive the errand. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and the local time in the comments so we can see who else is wandering through history with us. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step closer, brushing moss away from the hard basalt surface, tracing lines cut by hands long gone. The head is massive, nearly 3 meters tall, and you notice the helmet-like headdress carved into its crown. A nose broad and strong, cheeks solid, and lips that seem almost alive. You tilt your head, half expecting it to breathe. Instead, the stone just hums with silence, as though it knows secrets you're not ready for. The fact is plain. Archaeologists call these the colossal Olmec Heads, scattered across the Gulf Coast of Mexico, dating back to around 1200 to 400 BCE. They are the unmistakable markers of the Olmec civilization, often described as the mother culture of Mesoamerica. These stone faces have stared into the jungle for centuries, unmoved while empires rose and fell. But here's a curious tidbit. Locals once believed these heads weren't ancient at all, but leftovers from Spanish colonial times, like random garden ornaments that got out of hand. Imagine stumbling over a 3-meter granite face and saying, "Ah yes, decorative lawn art from the 1500s. That's one way to understate history. You run your hand over the surface and feel little grooves where the stone was once hammered and polished. Historians still argue whether these heads were portraits of real rulers, idealized symbols, or something more spiritual entirely. Were they meant to intimidate enemies, honor leaders, or serve as guardians of sacred places? No one knows for sure. The jungle presses in around you. Strange calls echo from unseen birds, and the buzzing of insects forms a constant low drone, like background music designed to keep you on edge. You glance back at the colossal head, its eyes still locked somewhere beyond your vision. You wonder, did the people who carved it imagine you standing here, thousands of years later, staring up in awe? A mosquito bites your neck. You slap it away, muttering something not fit for bedtime history, but the stone doesn't judge. It just sits there, massive and indifferent, as if amused that humans still fuss about such small annoyances while the great mysteries remain unsolved. You notice a second head partially buried in the soil, its features softened by centuries of weather. It almost looks like it's dozing, sinking back into the earth that once gave it shape. You crouch, brushing the dirt from its lips, and think about how much effort it must have taken to haul these stones from miles away, without wheels, without draft animals, without iron tools. Your legs ache just imagining it. Honestly, if someone asked you to roll a 3-ton boulder across a swamp today, you'd probably just politely decline and go back to binge-watching something. Still, here these giants remain. You sense the weight of history pressing down, as though the heads themselves are doorways, standing between you and the secrets of an entire civilization. You shiver, not from the air. It's too hot for that. But from the realization that you are not the first to be mesmerized here, and you won't be the last. The forest quiets for a moment. Even the insects seem to pause, as though giving the stone heads room to speak. But they never do. They just watch, waiting. You push past the heads, the trail curling deeper into the sticky heat of the Gulf lowlands. The ground squishes under your sandals, and the smell of wet earth mixes with the faint sweetness of rotting fruit. It feels as if you're walking into a world suspended in time, a place where stone gods and human lives once collided every day. Through the dense curtain of green, a wide clearing opens, and suddenly you're standing where the Olmec world once thrived. Villages cluster along the rivers. Smoke rises in twisting ribbons from earthen hearths, drifting lazily into the sky. Children run barefoot through the mud, chasing each other with shrieks of laughter. Farmers guide digging sticks into soft soil, planting maize, beans, and squash, the three sisters of Mesoamerican life. The air tastes like charcoal and corn, mingled with the briny scent of nearby swamps. The fact is solid. The Olmecs are widely considered the first major civilization of Mesoamerica, flourishing roughly from 1500 to 400 BCE. They settled in the humid lowlands of present-day Veracruz and Tabasco, building societies that shaped everything from later art to calendars. Here, in this soggy cradle, civilizations after them found their roots. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some legends claim the Olmecs had rubber balls so bouncy that when dropped, they could leap higher than a person's head. If true, they may have invented the world's first extreme sport centuries before Red Bull even thought about sponsoring it. Imagine an ancient referee blowing a conch shell while kids holler, "Best 2 out of 3. You walk further, passing raised mounds where leaders once stood, directing rituals under the watch of gods. The community hums with rhythm, paddles slapping water as canoes slice along rivers, dogs barking at shadows, drums echoing like thunder. You can almost feel the heartbeat of this society pulsing beneath your feet. Historians still argue whether the Olmecs were truly a mother culture that directly inspired later civilizations, or whether they were one of several parallel societies developing side by side. Either way, their influence lingers like fingerprints pressed into wet clay. You pause near a hut woven from reeds and palm leaves. Inside, a family prepares food. A woman grinds maize on a stone metate, her rhythmic motion soothing, like the soft snore of the earth itself. A man tends to cacao beans, roasting slowly in clay pots. The bitter aroma rises, sharp and earthy, curling into your nose. You take a deep breath, then cough, because let's be real, unprocessed cacao smells nothing like your sweet, hot chocolate packets. Somewhere, the Olmecs are laughing at your spoiled taste buds. Walking further, you stumble over the roots of a ceiba tree, towering above everything else, its branches reaching like arms into the sky. In Olmec belief, trees like this connect the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. Standing there, you can't help but picture the trunk as a cosmic elevator. Going up, please hold on to your maize offerings and keep your arms inside at all times. The swamp hums louder as dusk creeps closer. Frogs croak in deep bass notes, and fireflies ignite, scattering like tiny lanterns. You follow the faint path to where a small shrine once stood, an altar stone carved with jaguars and serpents. Its grooves catch the last golden rays of sun, glowing like embers. The Olmecs didn't just live in this landscape. They carved meaning into every river bend, every hill, every stone. As the night breathes down on the village, you step back, taking it all in. The smoke, the laughter, the strange symphony of jungle life blending with human ambition. You sense how fragile and powerful this world must have felt, caught between mud and spirit, between survival and ceremony. The colossal heads you saw earlier suddenly make more sense. They weren't random stone decorations. They were born from the soil of this living, buzzing, steaming place. Still, the question lingers in your mind. Who were these people really, and how did they manage to create monuments so immense in a land so unforgiving? The jungle whispers no answer, just the sound of crickets, as steady as a ticking clock counting down to secrets yet untold. You follow the riverbank as dawn breaks, mist lifting off the water like steam from a giant kettle. The ground turns firmer beneath your feet, leading you toward higher ground, where stories whisper about impossible strength. Ahead, you spot an enormous block of dark basalt, half-shaped, resting awkwardly like a forgotten project. It looks as though someone tried to carve a mountain and then went off for lunch about 2,500 years ago and never came back. This is where the secret begins. The colossal heads weren't carved from local stone. The basalt came from the Tuxtla Mountains, some 50 to 60 miles away from where most heads were discovered. That's a mainstream fact. Archaeologists have traced the chemical fingerprint of the rock back to those quarries. Imagine hauling a 20-ton boulder across swampy rivers and jungle without wheels, cranes, or horses. It makes dragging your couch up a stairwell feel like child's play. A quirky tidbit pops up here. Some fringe storytellers suggest the Olmecs might have softened stone using unknown plant chemicals. The idea is wild, like discovering a recipe for stone soup that turns granite into Play-Doh. There's no real evidence, but the image of ancient masons mashing herbs and smearing them on boulders like barbecue sauce is hard not to giggle at. You crouch, running your hand along the basalt's gritty surface. Tool marks appear like scars across its side, proof of hammering with harder stones, chipping away bit by bit. You imagine the steady rhythm, tap, 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 for months or even years until a face began to emerge. No shortcuts, no machinery, just relentless patience. Historians still argue whether the Olmecs used rafts to float these massive stones downstream or rolled them on log rollers through swamps. Either method sounds exhausting. If your Fitbit tracked Olmec laborers, the daily step count would probably break the app. You follow an ancient trail, imagining teams of workers sweating under the weight of ropes biting into their shoulders. The jungle buzzes louder with their imagined shouts, calling for rhythm as they haul. You can almost hear the squelch of mud, the strain of rope, the splashes as rafts creak dangerously in the current. One misstep, and 20 tons of stone vanish into the muck forever. It's a kind of logistics nightmare even Amazon Prime would refuse to deliver. At a bend in the river, you pause, picturing the scene. Dozens of men balancing on logs, shifting boulders inch by inch, chanting to keep time. The air thickens with mosquitoes, sweat, and the metallic tang of stone grinding stone. A carved whistle blows, and the mass heaves forward another yard. Night falls over your imagined caravan. Torches flicker, throwing light on faces etched with exhaustion and determination. You notice how the jungle seems alive, with watching eyes. Jaguars prowling unseen, crocodiles sliding silently through muddy waters. In this theater of danger, every stone hauled was more than labor. It was devotion, a kind of moving prayer. By morning, the boulder finally rests in a clearing. Workers collapse onto the ground, panting, laughing with relief. They've won a small battle in a war against gravity. You squat beside them, wiping sweat from your brow, even though yours is imaginary. And you sense how each stone carried the weight of a kingdom's pride. You return your gaze to the colossal head, still waiting in the quarry, half born from basalt. Its blank eyes look upward, as if daring you to wonder. How much strength, how much willpower went into shaping giants out of mountains? The jungle wind stirs, rustling leaves like a whisper of approval. The Olmecs may be gone, but the path of stone they left behind still winds through the lowlands, daring you to follow further. You return to the clearing as the blank boulder grows a face, features rising from stone, the way dawn pulls shapes out of night. The sculptor's rhythm settles around you. Tap, rotate, smooth, tap, rotate, smooth, until cheeks swell, a nose stands proud, and lips find that familiar, sealed calm. You lean closer and feel personality arriving. No two mouths curve exactly the same. No two eyes hold quite the same steady watch. The more you look, the more intention you sense. This isn't just a head, it's a person. Rank, memory, reputation, pressed into basalt so time can't argue back. The plain fact sits in the chips at your feet. Most scholars hold that these colossal heads are individualized portraits, very likely of rulers. The evidence isn't subtle. You can read it in the specific cheekbones, the slightly different jawlines, the careful attention to ear spools, chin straps, and headgear. All those power accessories you only bother to chisel when the owner can make decisions that affect everyone's dinner plans. If you're going to craft the world's heaviest selfie, you include the jewelry. And no, you don't get a retake. The undo button is, unfortunately, more basalt. You circle behind the work team and study the carved helmet, a snug cap banded with cords, sometimes with knots, sometimes with plumes or crest-like lumps. Historians still argue whether this headgear represents war helmets, ceremonial caps, or the protective gear of the ritual ball game. You picture all three possibilities in quick cuts: a commander narrowing his gaze at the horizon, a priest steadying breath before a chant, an athlete squinting through sunlight as the rubber ball hisses past. One cap, many rolls, like a hat rack for power. A warm breeze slips through the clearing, and for a ridiculous half-second, you swear those carved cords might be about to swish. A mason wipes grit from a cheek and beckons you to the back of the block. Your fingers pass over a set of straight planes, oddly regular compared to the face's curves. Third-person voice drops in briefly. Several colossal heads show signs of having been reworked from earlier basalt thrones or altars, a mainstream observation at San Lorenzo. A seat of power, recarved into a face of power, political rebranding long before anyone invented press conferences. The joke writes itself: fewer speeches, more chisels. You crouch by a basket of hammerstones, their edges dulled from long service. The carver chooses one with the care you reserve for picking a perfectly ripe avocado. then coaxes the brow ridge toward shade and shine. Chips fall like dark petals. Each petal is a decision. Somewhere beyond the work line, you imagine a council murmuring approval, the way patrons in any era hover just close enough to be helpful and just far enough to be remembered in the credits. No pressure, just immortalize the boss correctly, or your performance review will be set in stone. A quirky tidbit wanders in with a grin. Modern onlookers sometimes insist the caps look suspiciously like American football helmets and half joke that these were ancient linemen. Cute image, though the only touchdowns in this arena involved getting a 40-ton boulder to actually touch down in the right plaza. Still, the comparison sticks because the headgear feels functional and snug, like something meant to meet force with focus. Whether it guarded minds in plazas or heads on courts, it announces seriousness. This face belonged to someone who mattered. You pace along the jawline where smoothing has left a satin sheen. In the mid-morning glare, the surface drinks light and then returns it in soft gray, like clouded water. The serenity you see on the outside hides a chorus behind it. Quarry crews, rope teams, planners, sculptors, months of bodies arranged like a living machine. Neutral narrator adds one anchored detail. The known colossal heads come from Gulf Coast centers such as San Lorenzo, La Venta, Tres Zapotes, and Rancho La Cobata, and date to roughly 1200–400 BCE. You imagine a traveler moving among those places and recognizing the look right away. Ah, that gaze, that's a royal face, the way you can spot a style across cities today. Then a tiny asymmetry catches your eye. The mouth's left corner turns the slightest degree, an almost smile or nearly sternness, depending on where you stand. Far from a flaw, it reads like character. These are not generic masks pressed from a mold. You suspect that sculptors studied real profiles, perhaps by torchlight, committing the slope of a nose and the posture of a chin to muscle memory before stone got its say. You can even picture a very patient session. Could you tilt your head? Not that much. The block gets shy. The workshop laughs and the face tightens into something unmistakably specific. A group arrives with cloths and small bowls, and you catch a new shimmer in the air. Color. Some researchers propose that the heads were once painted, at least during ceremonies. Traces on other Olmec monuments hint that pigment mattered. If that's true, then these gray giants once wore festival hues. Headgear deepened with green, lips warmed with red, ear spools darkened like midnight drops. Add drums and incense, and the gaze would have been less stone and more presence, the way a stadium statue glows when the floodlights snap on. Across the clearing, elders measure with a rope grid, low-tech alignment lines stretched and squared. Brows get a satisfied nod. An ear spool earns a thoughtful hum. The supervisor leans in, runs a thumb along the eyelid, and steps back. You feel the quiet swell of accomplishment move through the crew. Memory has been given a face big enough to anchor conversation for generations. It's amazing how persuasive scale can be. Try arguing with a sculpture that can shade your entire picnic. See how far your counterpoint gets. You step farther back, and the whole expression changes again. Not exactly smiling, not exactly stern, just steady. At other sites, heads were set in pits so that only the face rose from the ground. The effect is powerful. You meet a presence instead of a statue. Neutral voice adds another observation that archaeologists accept. Several heads were intentionally reburied or relocated in antiquity, as though rituals required them to disappear and return. You can almost hear the stage whisper, "Not gone, just sleeping." If you've ever put a big project on pause and called it resting, you may be more Olmec than you think. Still, answers keep their distance. Were these heads solitary monuments or parts of choreographed ensembles with thrones, courtyards, and procession routes? Historians still argue whether their placements mapped dynastic succession, sacred directions, or civic boundaries that guided movement through the city. Your own footsteps feel like commas in a sentence begun long before you, and the face reads you as calmly as you read it. An apprentice brings you a water skin and repeats the workshop favorite. If the ruler doesn't like the likeness, we'll just add more stone. It lands every time because it's charmingly impossible. In a craft of subtraction, the joke's entire premise collapses. And that's the laugh. He rests a hand against the cheek, and the temperature of deep rock presses through skin. Cool now, cool later, cool long. After this apprentice is a story told at another fire. By afternoon, the shadows grow longer, and quiet slips into the clearing. Lines that hid at noon now come forward, the knit of the brow, the weight of the lip, the slight cant of the head toward a future no one here will see. A society consolidates belief by giving it a face the size of certainty. No manifesto, no motto, just a gaze that refuses to rush. The tools go back into baskets, shoulders ease, jokes drift with the smoke of evening fires. You linger beside the finished head and gather the core truth and the stubborn doubts. The truth is mainstream and simple. These are portraits, most likely rulers, shaped with care meant to outlast kingdoms. The doubts glow like fireflies you can't quite catch. Who chose the subject? Which features signaled a bloodline, or a victory, or the favor of a god? Who stood here first and felt seen, or judged, or blessed? You listen for answers and hear only the steady breath of the forest. Night comes on, and the face keeps watching, unblinking, patient, as if promising to carry the weight of identity longer than any crown could ever manage. Night loosens its grip, and drums begin like distant thunder. You follow the pulse toward an open rectangle of packed earth, flanked by low embankments. The air tastes of dew and wood smoke, and the court feels charged, like a theater with the curtains still down and the audience already holding its breath. You step to the edge and see markers along the sides, smoothed by hands and seasons. A runner drags a palm frond broom across the floor, tracing a boundary line as neat as a quill stroke. The day's first contest will be more than a game. It will be a statement, and everyone knows it. Players arrive in pairs, hips wrapped in thick belts, knees padded, shoulders braced by leather and cloth. They stretch in silence, faces calm, eyes narrowed the way hunters watch a clearing. A rubber ball, dark, heavy, faintly glossy, rests on a woven tray like a compact planet. When you lean closer, you can smell tree sap and something vine green, a reminder that this sphere was once a milky drip from a forest wound. Neutral voice slides in for one plain anchor. The Mesoamerican ball game is ancient, and the earliest known ball court, Paso de la Amada, dates to about 1400 BCE, a timeline that sits comfortably within and just before the rise of Olmec centers. A conch shell sounds, mellow and commanding. You feel the court shift from place to purpose. A priest steps forward, dusts the ball with fine powder, and sets it down at center. The rules here are more posture than prose. Keep the ball moving without using hands or feet, protect your side, control the bounce, and above all, never let the sphere admit defeat on the ground. Strategies whisper around you, angles off the hip, glancing strikes from the thigh, the small miracle of turning force into flight with a twist of the torso. It's physics by instinct, geometry by heartbeat. You take a seat among traders, potters, and farmers. Elders lean on sticks carved with jaguar spirals. Children crowd the front, buzzing with questions, while dignitaries claim the shaded side where a canopy drips green light. A vendor passes with Jacara cups. The drink is bitter, spiced, and proud of it. You sip and try not to make the face you always make when something tastes like homework. Across the court, a player jokes with the crowd by wobbling his knees like a baby deer. The laugh lands, tension softens, and you remember that showmanship is its own kind of armor. The serve is less a throw than an invitation. The first striker dips, lifts, and snaps a hip. The ball arcs low, skims the floor, and leaps toward the opposite line. A defender slides, pelvis turning, and redirects the sphere so cleanly it's like a mirror learned to dance. The crowd erupts, sharp whoops, hands clapped against forearms, calls that sound like birds arguing over sunlight. You feel yourself leaning, forecasting bounces, inhaling with every strike. Civilization, at least for this hour, is a rubber ball deciding who deserves tomorrow's applause. Historians still argue whether the ball game here determined succession directly, settled disputes that might otherwise have soured alliances, or encoded myths of life, death, and return into a choreography of rebounds. Outcomes could bless a ruler's claim, temper a feud, or simply demonstrate that fate favored steadiness. In any case, authority borrows spectacle, and spectacle borrows authority, until the two become hard to separate, like smoke woven into cloth. Between volleys, a rumor wanders the benches. Ambassadors arrived at dawn. A marriage will be announced if the home side performs with grace. The court itself will speak through the bounce. You smile at the idea that a scoreboard might be hiding in the sky. Just in case, you glance up. No digits, only vultures circling in such tidy geometry that you briefly suspect they've been hired to do brand-appropriate graphics. A quirky tidbit drifts into the hush. Some enthusiasts claim certain courts across Mesoamerica whisper back your clap in bird-like echoes, an acoustic trick that later builders may have perfected. Whether true here or not, the court's geometry definitely makes sound feel larger than it should. When the conch calls again, the note hangs like a banner, and even the dogs tilt their heads as if attending a lecture on advanced reverberation for sacred spaces. The rally grows fierce and elegant. Players bend like reeds, then snap straight, sending the ball along razor paths. One striker misreads a bounce, and the sphere thumps his hip with a hollow thud that everyone feels in the ribs. He grins through the sting, lifts both hands, not to touch, but to show restraint, and the crowd rewards the discipline. You catch yourself whispering coaching tips you absolutely did not earn. Lower center, watch the angle, pretend gravity is a polite suggestion. Neutral voice returns to lay a quiet trail of context. Rubber itself is not just gathered, it's crafted. Ancient artisans in these lowlands learned to blend latex with plant juices to adjust elasticity, turning jungle chemistry into performance. One of those practical marvels, that rarely gets the poster spotlight yet makes everything else possible. That knowledge rolls in every bounce, and you feel an odd affection for the anonymous tinkerers whose experiments built a continent-wide pastime. Across the aisle, a storyteller reminds a fidgeting child that the court is a model of the cosmos. Underworld on one end, bright world on the other, the ball as the relentless sun seeking passage. It's mythology translated into muscle memory, and for a heartbeat you believe the metaphor too much and half expect the East to applaud. You smirk at yourself. You're allowed a mystical lapse before lunch. Yet the stakes remain human. If the home side triumphs, a tribute caravan might travel safely next moon. If the visitors dazzle, grain shipments could double on the river. Games become treaties that don't need signatures, only endurance. As points accumulate, counted on knotted cords and lifted fingers, you sense politics stretching its legs in the shade, nodding at each clever save. It's a tidy solution. Let skill do what swords should not. Also, honestly, far fewer laundry problems. A hush falls when a ceremonial play is announced. The ball must strike a raised mark, difficult, almost theatrical. Drums lower their heartbeat, breath tightens, and you could hear a cacao shell drop. The striker lines up, hips angled, shoulders loose, and releases a blow so precise it feels like a sentence finishing itself. The ball kisses the mark and springs away. The court exhales. Somewhere behind you, a child swears they saw the air blink. You politely decline to correct the physics. Sometimes astonishment deserves better than an explanation. But the court is not all joy. Neutral voice steps carefully. Across Mesoamerica, the ball game often carried ritual weight, and some ceremonies concluded with offerings and solemn rites. In the Olmec world, evidence points to sacred associations rather than simple recreation. The sphere, the court, the rhythm of life, all braided into belief. The language on the benches turns softer, respectful, as if the court itself listens. You choose your thoughts with similar care, letting metaphor do the heavy lifting where details vanish into silence. Heat thickens, shadows fold along the embankments. A final exchange darts corner to corner, then dies as the ball rests, humming with spent motion. The conch closes the space, and people rise in twos and threes, stretching stiff knees, trading verdicts and recipes for luck. A player limps a little and laughs it off with a line about the ball having opinions. Another balances the sphere on a hip and poses for the crowd. Half clown, half comet. You promise yourself to practice hip geometry later and immediately break that promise. As the court empties, you linger. You've seen grace turned into authority, and authority disguised as grace, and a community choosing to stage its anxieties as a contest of angles rather than a clash of blades. The heads in the plazas might claim who ruled. The ball court shows how rule is accepted. You stand, dust the back of your legs, and feel the court's quiet settle in your bones like a new kind of memory, one that bounces before it comes to rest. You rise from the court, still feeling the echo of hip strikes and drum beats vibrating in your chest, and step along a raised causeway that leads toward a wider horizon. The jungle parts as if in rehearsal, revealing lines of earth shaped by hands that meant business. Before you stretches La Venta, one of the great ceremonial centers of the Olmec world. Its outlines are subtle now, grassy mounds, tree-draped ridges, but with a little imagination and a dash of moonlight, the whole city stands up around you. Straight ahead, a massive pyramid swells from the ground like a frozen wave of clay. Neutral voice speaks softly. This great mound at La Venta, once about 110 feet high, is among the earliest large pyramids in Mesoamerica, constructed not of cut stone blocks, but of packed earth carried basket by basket. Each load feels like a heartbeat deposited in a mountain. You crane your neck, and it seems to rise taller the longer you stare, as if testing your balance between reverence and vertigo. To your left, wide plazas stretch like calm lakes of soil. Imagine them bright with morning rituals, priests scattering incense, dancers stamping in feathered skirts, common folk circling in murmurs. The air smells of copal resin, sweet, sharp, stinging the nose, and the smoke drifts upward in blue ribbons, persuading the gods to lean a little closer. A fact you tuck into your pouch. La Venta flourished between 900 and 400 BCE, its layout carefully oriented north-south, suggesting cosmological order rather than accident. This city was no jungle sprawl. It was a map of belief anchored to the stars. You stroll past a row of colossal heads, their lips pressed into that same eternal calm, watching the plazas like bouncers at a cosmic nightclub. A boy chasing a dog runs straight into the foot of one head, then bounces back laughing, and you can't help but chuckle, too. The stone doesn't react. It's seen worse. The dog, however, looks personally offended. Beyond the plazas lie the complex A mounds, once home to ritual deposits. Archaeologists have uncovered mosaics of green serpentine blocks laid in abstract masks, then deliberately buried. You crouch low, brushing phantom dirt aside, and the pattern flickers into life. Jaguar eyes wide, mouth agape, a god looking up from the earth. The odd thing? These mosaics weren't meant for human eyes after burial. They were offerings for deities, placed carefully, then hidden forever. It's like spending months knitting a sweater and immediately locking it in a chest. Except the chest is the underworld, and the sweater is made of thousands of polished stones. Here's a quirky tidbit. One offering at La Venta contained hundreds of tiny jade and serpentine figurines arranged in a semicircle, as if gathered for a council meeting. When discovered, some archaeologists joked it looked like the world's first boardroom. You can almost hear one little jade man clearing his throat. All in favor of not being reburied under tons of clay? Raise your hands. Too late. They're still under there. Historians still argue whether La Venta's pyramid was primarily a tomb, a temple, or a stage for grand ceremonies. Was it a ladder for spirits, a storage vault of kings, or simply a platform to remind everyone that rulers could make mountains? You climb partway up the slope, your feet sinking into earth that smells of iron and rain. From this height, the plazas below flatten into a chessboard where people are pieces, moving in rhythms you can only guess. The sun dips low, throwing long shadows across the ceremonial avenue. Drums start again, slower this time, like footsteps of giants. Torches line the stairways, smoke weaves banners in the dusk. You stand among the crowd as priests in jaguar pelts appear at the pyramid's peak, arms raised against the fading light. They chant, voices carrying like waves across the plazas, and the hush below feels so complete that even the insects forget their lines. You taste the moment, corn ash, sweat, the sweetness of fermenting cacao in nearby jars. The night thickens until stars prick the sky, aligning, so it seems, with the pyramid's axis. Someone nudges you, whispering that the gods are watching. You believe it for a moment, And maybe that's the point. You walk back toward the plaza edge, head still buzzing from incense and alignment and crowd energy. La Venta is not just a city of earth and clay. It is a compass made of human will, pointing both upward to the sky and downward into buried secrets. You feel caught in the middle, exactly where the Olmecs intended you to be. You drift away from the plaza's hum, following a faint trail where shadows gather. The path curves past a low mound, and suddenly the jungle clears into a grove where stone and jade shimmer in the moonlight. Strange figures stare at you, wide mouths, almond eyes, and something uncanny in their shape. You blink because these aren't ordinary carvings. They seem half-human, half-feline, frozen mid-transformation. Neutral voice leans in. One of the defining features of Olmec art is the were-jaguar motif, a blend of human and jaguar characteristics. Scholars recognize cleft heads, downturned mouths, and almond eyes as hallmarks. The jaguar was a creature of immense power in the Olmec imagination, hunter of the night, master of rivers, emblem of strength that slips between worlds. You crouch to examine a jade figurine, its surface smooth and cool, like it still remembers the river where the stone was born. The figure has the face of a child, but its lips curl feline, and its eyes gleam with an otherworldly patience. You can't decide if it's adorable, terrifying, or both. A sort of supernatural toddler you would never volunteer to babysit. A fact settles beside you. The Olmecs produced exquisite jade carvings, masks, celts, and figurines, often with jaguar or hybrid features, hinting at deep spiritual symbolism. They revered the animal not just as predator, but as a bridge between human vulnerability and divine ferocity. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some early archaeologists were so puzzled by the odd baby jaguar faces that they nicknamed them were-jaguars and suggested they might be depictions of supernatural offspring born from unions of women and jaguars. Not exactly peer-reviewed zoology, but the idea stuck in the imagination. You can't help but grin at the thought of an Olmec kid saying, "Mom, Dad, my babysitter turned into a jaguar again." You walk deeper into the grove, and torchlight reveals bas-reliefs carved into stone blocks. Human figures bend at the waist, arms cradling jaguar-like infants. The images hum with ambiguity. Are these offerings, myths, or records of something too sacred to name? Historians still argue whether the were-jaguar motif represents gods of rain, spirits of fertility, or shamanic transformations. A breeze stirs, carrying the musk of damp leaves and the distant growl of a real jaguar somewhere beyond the trees. For a heartbeat, the hair rises on your arms. You imagine a shaman kneeling here centuries ago, his body painted in spots, whispering prayers to merge with the animal's strength. His breathing slows until his heartbeat matches the drumbeat of the jungle. In his mind, claws extend, vision sharpens, and the human frame becomes something else. You shiver, not from cold, but from the feeling that the transformation might still be possible if you believed hard enough. A group of artisans sits nearby, grinding jade with sand and water, the rasping sound oddly soothing. One jokes that working jade is like arguing with your mother-in-law. Progress is slow, but the results can be dazzling. The others chuckle, and for a moment the sacred and the ordinary mingle. Divinity debated between laughter and blisters. You pick up a small figurine shaped like a crouching jaguar, its back arched, ears flat. The curves are so precise that even in miniature, it radiates menace. You set it down carefully, convinced it might pounce if you get careless. At the far end of the grove, a mask lies propped on a stone slab. Its mouth curves downward, its eyes half closed as if in meditation. Neutral voice reminds you that no Olmec masks have been found attached to faces in burials. They may have been ritual items, worn in ceremonies, or left as offerings. Imagine slipping that jade mask over your face, breathing through its silence, becoming something ancient and feline in the torchlight. You might scare yourself more than anyone else. The night deepens, and you hear the shuffle of dancers arriving. Their bodies gleam with paint. Jaguar spots climb their shoulders, stripes streak their legs. They prowl in slow circles, tails of feathers swishing behind them, voices growling low. The rhythm of drums thickens, heartbeat heavy, and soon the dancers blur into the vision of jaguars pacing the edge of the clearing. For a dizzy moment, you forget they are human at all. The fire flares, casting shadows that leap like predators across the stone. The were-jaguar carvings seem to stir, mouths curving wider, eyes narrowing as if they approve. You step back slowly, careful not to break the spell. What remains clear is that the Olmecs lived in a world where boundaries dissolved, between human and animal, ruler and spirit, day and night. The jaguar was both symbol and doorway, a reminder that strength often comes from straddling two realms. You leave the grove with the whisper of claws still echoing in your ears. The path unwinds toward water, and soon you're standing at the edge of a wide, slow-moving river. Its surface glimmers with broken moonlight, dotted with lily pads and the occasional croc's eye peeking like a misplaced marble. You watch as canoes slide silently from the reeds, their long hulls painted with jaguar spots and serpent coils. Traders kneel inside, their paddles slicing clean, each stroke a whisper. This is how the Olmec world expanded, not by endless marching through mud, but by gliding across watery highways. Neutral voice reminds you, rivers like the Coatzacoalcos, Tonalá, and Grijalva linked Olmec centers to one another and to far-off lands. Through these channels flowed not just people, but ideas, art, and the commodities that made kings nod with satisfaction. You step into a canoe, careful not to tip it, and settle on a woven mat. The wood smells of resin, damp yet sturdy. A trader grins, hands you a gourd cup of water, and pushes off. The current grips you, carrying you into the slow, rhythmic ballet of trade. Ahead, another boat glides past loaded with jade celts, their polished green glinting like frozen rivers. Another is stacked with cacao beans, sealed in clay jars, the rich bitterness already scenting the air. And from a third boat bounces something odd, rubber balls, tightly packed, looking like the world's earliest shipment of sporting goods. A solid fact keeps you anchored. The Olmecs traded widely, spreading jade, serpentine, obsidian, cacao, and rubber far beyond their homeland. Artifacts of Olmec origin have been found hundreds of miles away, suggesting an influence that reached deep into future civilizations. They weren't just sculptors of stone heads, they were movers of economies. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some researchers argue the Olmecs may have even exported their recipe for vulcanized rubber, mixing latex with morning glory juice to achieve bounce and resilience. Imagine pitching that at a Shark Tank session. Hi, we've invented sports equipment, waterproof sandals, and possibly the first bungee cords. Interested? Your canoe glides under a canopy of vines, and the paddlers point out other goods: jaguar pelts, feathers shimmering like liquid emerald, and strange shells from distant coasts. Each object carries both material and spiritual weight. A feather is not just a feather. It's a license to speak with the wind. A pelt is not merely fur. It's the cloak of a god disguised as a cat. The river widens, and on its banks rise temporary markets. Fires crackle, merchants haggle, children dart between piles of goods. You hop ashore, nearly tripping over a basket of obsidian blades, so sharp they could shave a frog's eyebrow. The seller chuckles at your clumsiness, muttering something probably unflattering, but too polite to translate. You wander between stalls, watching jade change hands for salt, cacao swapped for obsidian. People chew roasted maize, sip cacao drinks spiced with chili, and debate loudly over who has the best gourds this season. It feels like a farmer's market with way more jaguar pelts. A dog snatches a tortilla from a distracted merchant, and everyone laughs except the merchant. You bite back a grin. Historians still argue whether these markets were strictly local exchanges or part of a centralized economy controlled by elites. Were rulers skimming tribute from every deal, or were families bartering independently under divine oversight? Either way, wealth flowed, and with it prestige and political leverage. You pause at a stall displaying carved jade masks. The artisan hands you one, its surface cool, lips curved in that eternal Olmec down-turned style. You lift it to your face, peering through the slits, and for a moment the world looks greener, sharper. You lower it quickly before you start convincing yourself you're half jaguar again. The river calls you back. You climb into the canoe and let the current carry you onward. On the banks, children wave, their laughter bouncing like rubber balls across the water. You wave back, realizing how alive these routes once were. Arteries pumping lifeblood into a civilization. The night deepens, stars scattering overhead. Your paddlers sing softly, their voices low and steady, weaving with the splash of oars. The trade goods lie between your feet, whispering of distant buyers and future kingdoms. Each jade bead, each cacao bean, each polished ball is a promise of connection. You close your eyes, lulled by the current, and feel the whole Olmec world drifting with you, bound together by rivers, by commerce, by the quiet hum of exchange. The canoe noses into a bend where the river narrows, and you climb ashore into a clearing dotted with low huts. Smoke curls from cooking fires, and the scent of roasting maize drifts sweet and earthy. At first it feels like any quiet village, but as you wander closer, you notice something unsettling. Skulls. Not gruesome piles, but carefully arranged displays, some elongated, some oddly shaped, some carved with faint lines as if meant to hold memory. Neutral voice steadies the moment. Archaeologists have discovered evidence of intentional cranial deformation among the Olmecs, achieved by binding infants' heads with boards or cloth to produce elongated skulls. This practice was not unique to them. It appears in multiple ancient societies, often tied to status, beauty, or spiritual identity. To the Olmecs, reshaping the head may have been a way of reshaping destiny. You crouch to examine one of the models, its brow sloping steeply, its crown stretched like an oval fruit. You try to picture someone walking around with this shape in daily life, and can't help but chuckle at the thought of ancient hat makers despairing. Great, now we need helmets in size, otherworldly. A plain fact stands out. Several colossal heads also show distinct cranial shapes, suggesting the portraits may have captured individuals who underwent this body modification. It wasn't a random oddity. It was an identity badge carved into the skull itself. Here's the quirky tidbit. Fringe writers have looked at these elongated skulls and jumped straight to aliens. Yes, extraterrestrials dropping by for a quick sculpting workshop. According to such tales, the Olmecs were either visited by, descended from, or in communication with beings from beyond the stars. You glance at the colossal heads and half expect them to beam up like giant stone walkie-talkies. If they ever did, you hope the signal wasn't on dial-up. You stroll deeper into the village, where artisans chip away at stone figurines. Some depict humans with feline grins, others cradle jaguar babies, but a few show people with stretched heads, their proportions exaggerated like living exclamation points. Children watch curiously as you pass, their own foreheads wrapped in soft cloth, families murmuring prayers that the shaping will bring strength or wisdom. Historians still argue whether cranial deformation among the Olmecs was primarily aesthetic, symbolic of elite lineage, or connected to shamanic transformation. Did the reshaped skull mark someone as closer to the divine, or simply as a member of the in-crowd? No one can agree, and you suspect even the ancient villagers would laugh at modern certainty. You step into a dim hut where a healer tends to herbs. Bundles of dried leaves hang from the ceiling, and a clay pot bubbles faintly in the corner. The healer lifts a skull model with reverence, tracing the curve with painted fingers, whispering words about rain, maize, and the jaguar spirit. You sense the head is not just bone, but a vessel of cosmic alignment, like a sacred jar shaped from birth. Stepping back into the night, you tilt your head toward the colossal figures you saw earlier. Their helmets suddenly seem less decorative, more like crowns designed for heads of unusual proportion. You wonder if rulers with elongated skulls looked even more imposing in person, their profiles outlined against the firelight, their shadows stretching unnaturally tall across the plazas. Crickets sing, frogs echo from the river. A trader passes by with a sack of cacao beans, glancing at the skulls without surprise. To him, this is no strangeness. This is identity, as ordinary as family names today. You realize how much cultures can differ. What you might call bizarre, they called beautiful, powerful, divine. Still, the unease lingers. These skulls spark questions that reach beyond anthropology. Were the Olmecs experimenting with the boundaries of the human form, or reaching for shapes they thought belonged to the gods? Were they trying to sculpt themselves into something closer to jaguar, rain, or sky? The stars overhead glitter like distant eyes, refusing to answer. The river fades behind you as you follow a trail into the interior. The air feels heavier, not from humidity this time, but from silence. Birds quiet, crickets slow, and even the trees seem reluctant to sway. You step into a clearing where mounds rise like sleeping animals, their slopes softened by centuries of rain. Once, these were plazas alive with traders, dancers, and priests. Now they slouch under grass, still but watchful, as though holding their breath. Neutral voice lays down the firm line. By around 400 BCE, the Olmec ceremonial centers like San Lorenzo and La Venta were abandoned. Archaeologists know the dates from radiocarbon and stratigraphy. After centuries of dominance, the Olmec cities emptied, their colossal heads left in silence. You wander between the mounds, trying to imagine what it looked like in its last days. Perhaps the incense still burned, though fewer people came to smell it. Perhaps ball games were played to half-empty courts, the crowd no longer loud enough to shake the heavens. You picture a lone drummer keeping rhythm long after the dancers had gone, his beat echoing into emptiness. Here's the quirky tidbit. At La Venta, some monuments were deliberately defaced or buried before abandonment, as if the Olmecs themselves wanted to close the chapter. Imagine moving out of a house and carefully locking each door with clay before leaving. It's almost ceremonial, like telling the gods, "We're done here, but please keep an eye on the place." You rest on a mound slope, grass brushing your arms. Historians still argue whether the Olmec decline was caused by environmental change, flooding rivers, silting fields, or shifting climate, by internal upheaval, or by rival cultures rising to challenge them. Was it slow erosion of power or sudden crisis? The debate lingers, heavy as the stones themselves. The clearing grows darker as clouds pass overhead. You notice how nature has reclaimed what once was empire. Roots split through stone blocks. Ants march confidently across abandoned altars. A toucan lands on a colossal head, tilts its bright beak as if mocking the solemn face, then flutters away. Even silence has a sense of humor. You wander deeper, where toppled monuments lie like fallen players after a long game. Some are cracked, others half-buried. You crouch beside one, brushing moss off its surface, and sense how fragile greatness can be. A city that once commanded trade and ritual now sags under weeds. The colossal heads remain, but without the ceremonies, without the people, they feel less like rulers and more like orphans waiting for company. Still, there's beauty in the quiet. The jungle orchestra begins again. Frogs croaking, cicadas rattling, a nightjar calling in 3 mournful notes. It sounds like a farewell song for a people who left without leaving an explanation. You can't help but imagine them walking away in long processions, carrying bundles, children, memories, and never looking back. You climb one last mound, gazing out at the vast, dark plain. From up here, you can almost see torches fading into distance, the last light of a civilization withdrawing from its stage. Below, the colossal heads remain, planted like bookmarks in the earth. They endure, but without voices. Their meaning drifts further from reach. The silence presses down again, thick and steady. The Olmec world has collapsed not with a bang, but with a hush, leaving questions louder than answers. You descend from the grassy mound, the hush of abandonment still clinging to your ears, but ahead another sound rises, chants, drums, laughter carried by centuries. You blink, and the scene shifts. The Olmecs may have walked away, but their shadows stretch far into the future. You step into a plaza not of La Venta, but of a Maya city centuries later. Here, faces and gods feel familiar, like cousins borrowing old costumes. Neutral voice reminds you of the fact. Many elements central to later Maya and Aztec cultures, sacred calendars, ball games, certain deities, show deep roots in Olmec traditions. Glyphs, symbols, and motifs echo down the timeline, as if the Olmecs whispered into the ears of their successors. A priest passes, carrying a mask carved with feline features. You recognize it immediately, the same downturned mouth, The same almond eyes of the Olmec were jaguar, reborn here as a rain god. The crowd kneels as incense curls upward, and you realize the Olmec spirit is not dead. It's been adopted, renamed, given new verses in the same song. Here's a quirky tidbit. Aztec legends mention a people they called the Olmeca Xicalaca, sometimes imagined as mysterious predecessors with strange powers. To the Aztecs, the Olmecs weren't just history. They were myth, almost magical ancestors who left behind giant heads as proof. You smile at the thought of later civilizations treating the Olmecs the way we treat superheroes, half history, half comic book. The ball game echoes here too. You wander to a Maya court, its walls steep and painted bright with murals. The players move with the same hip-driven grace you saw earlier, the same rubber balls thudding like drum beats of continuity. Children cheer, elders nod, and you catch yourself whispering, "I've seen this before," though no one hears. Historians still argue whether Olmec influence was direct transmission, teachers passing knowledge along, or whether later societies rediscovered and reinvented similar ideas. Did the Maya consciously look back, saying, "Let's do what the Olmecs did"? Or did shared roots naturally sprout in parallel? The answer hides in silence, but the similarities speak louder than denial. You stroll into an Aztec market, centuries later still. Merchants shout over piles of cacao beans, feathers shimmer, obsidian blades glint. In the center, a storyteller gestures toward the east, speaking of ancient giants who carved faces in stone and taught men to trade with the gods. The crowd murmurs with awe. Even now, the colossal heads shape imagination, though the Olmecs themselves are long gone. You chuckle as a vendor tries to sell you a small clay figurine, a squat man with a huge helmet. "Olmec souvenir, very rare," he insists. You're half tempted to buy it, except you realize clay doesn't fit in your carry-on luggage. The night deepens, and torches flare, shadows dancing across murals of jaguars, serpents, and rain gods. You notice how familiar the motifs feel. Olmec at the core, but stretched, remixed, adorned. The story hasn't ended. It's been translated, chapter after chapter, from Olmec into Maya, then into Aztec. You stand quietly, watching as a child clutches a small ball, eyes wide with the same wonder Olmec children once held. History isn't just bones and stones. It's habits that refuse to die, faces that refuse to fade. You realize the colossal heads never stopped speaking. They just learned new dialects. The torchlight flickers against murals of jaguars and serpents, and as you walk away from the Aztec marketplace, whispers rise around you, soft, insistent, like moth wings brushing your ear. The stories don't come from priests or traders this time. They come from dreamers, travelers, and fringe theorists who refuse to accept simple explanations. You pause, letting the chorus wash over you, and realize you've stepped into the hall of speculation. Neutral voice lays the steady ground. Archaeologists agree the colossal heads were carved by the Olmecs, using basalt from the Tuxtla Mountains between 1200 and 400 BCE. That's the mainstream fact: stone, tools, quarries, and time. But here's the quirky tidbit. For decades, some writers have insisted the faces look non-indigenous, proposing African, Mediterranean, or even Asian origins. A few suggested that sailors from across oceans drifted into the Gulf Coast and founded the Olmec world. Others leapt further, claiming extraterrestrials parked their starships here, dropped off basalt selfies, and zipped away. You tilt your head, picturing an alien in a sparkly helmet saying, "Trust me, this likeness is very flattering." You approach one colossal head, resting in the jungle moonlight. Its lips are broad, its nose wide, its headdress snug. Fringe accounts insist these are proof of ancient contact with African voyagers, long before Columbus. Some point to alleged similarities in facial features. Others cite impossible voyages made possible. Historians still argue whether these comparisons are respectful connections or just projections born of modern eyes searching for exotic stories. Another head looms with a stern frown. Theories cling to it like vines. Phoenicians from the Mediterranean, Chinese sailors blown off course, Atlanteans rising briefly before vanishing again. Each fringe idea insists the Olmecs couldn't possibly have managed such feats on their own, that outside genius must have delivered civilization in bulk shipment. You raise an eyebrow. To be fair, you struggle just carrying groceries up the stairs. Still, these explanations feel like giving aliens the credit every time ancient humans show ambition. A man in a feathered cape steps from the shadows of your imagination, shaking his head at the wild claims. He pats the stone cheek of the colossal head as if to say, "We did this, with our hands, with our sweat." You nod, though the whispers of alternative origins keep tugging at you like mischievous children. One storyteller insists the helmets look suspiciously like astronaut headgear. He points dramatically to the sky and announces that the Olmec Heads are portraits of ancient spacefarers. You glance back at the basalt giant, waiting for it to beam Morse code into Orion. Nothing happens, unless you count the owl hooting nearby as extraterrestrial commentary. Another traveler swears the heads once formed a navigation system, guiding ships across oceans or even portals between worlds. You imagine colossal heads lighting up like stone lighthouses, their stern gazes doubling as cosmic GPS. Turn left at the Jaguar Temple. Continue for 2 stars. You can't miss it. Still, you can't dismiss the allure of these ideas. They reveal more about human imagination than about Olmec history. Our tendency to see mystery and fill the silence with wonder, even when the truth is already astounding. Isn't hauling 20 tons of basalt across swamps impressive enough without adding UFOs? The moon dips lower, shadows thickening around the colossal heads. You walk among them slowly, hearing both voices, the steady rhythm of archaeology grounding you, and the speculative whispers swirling like fireflies. Somewhere between lies the real legacy of the Olmecs, not just the stones they left, but the curiosity they inspire, the way their silence invites us to dream. You leave the whispers of speculation and follow the practical music of trowels tapping earth. A field camp, tarps, line flags, buckets, glows under lamps, each square of soil a quiet stage. A brush passes over a floor so flat it reflects the light like water. Here, secrets don't leap, they seep. Neutral voice steadies your steps. Modern excavations at Olmec centers such as San Lorenzo, La Venta, and Tres Zapotes have revealed deliberate offerings of jade and serpentine, carved altars, often reinterpreted as thrones, with niche figures and deposits that were designed to be buried, not displayed. Some monuments were broken or reburied in antiquity, suggesting a ritual choreography of showing, hiding, and renewal. A darker stain appears in the profile wall, the outline of a pit. A gloved hand lifts a greenstone celt, satin smooth, its edge still crisp. More follow, another, arranged like sun rays frozen in earth. A firm fact settles beside the pit. At La Venta, archaeologists uncovered vast serpentine block mosaics laid out as stylized faces and then intentionally covered again. Beauty composed and then concealed on purpose. Another unit reveals a flat pavement that resolves brushstroke by brushstroke into a mask. Broad brow, oval eyes, down-turned mouth. Photographs, drawings, measurements. Then the conservator nods. The mask will be reburied after study, mirroring the ancient intention. You feel relief, as though a promise has been kept. Also, if you dropped it, you'd never recover from the second-hand embarrassment. So, yes, respectful distances. Across the trench, a small disk turns smoky bright, a mirror of polished hematite. Warped light gathers on its face like a clouded moon. Mirrors like this were status and symbol. Some believe they aided vision and divination. For a heartbeat, you see your own reflection look back, older and wiser, which is either the mirror's magic or the lamp angle doing you a kindness. The supervisor beckons you to a square where a broad block emerges, its facade carved into a niche with a seated figure holding a cord. This is one of those so-called altars. Throne fits too. The top is wide enough to seat authority. The front reads like a stage for myth. Historians still argue whether these blocks were primarily seats of rule, portals to the underworld, or both at once. A literal chair on a doorway between realms. A runner arrives with survey results. LiDAR has peeled away canopy, sketching faint causeways, platforms, and plazas, skeletal geometry beneath green flesh. Another accepted detail threads in. At San Lorenzo, engineers installed basalt-lined drains, channels that carried water under ceremonial spaces with deliberate control. You picture water sliding like trained serpents below, while incense drifted above. Underworld and sky in courteous balance. The trench shifts to finer tools, trowels to bamboo picks, whisk brooms to sable brushes. A bead glints, jade the color of river shade. Then a stingray spine appears, fragile and sharp, cushioned by sediment and care. No one narrates. The silence does the talking. A shallow box receives each piece, padded and labeled in tidy script that treats mud like manuscript. Here's a quirky tidbit to lighten the grid. Field archaeologists half joke that their superpower is getting wildly excited about dirt colors. In a stratigraphy of browns and tans, a thin gray band of ancient ash is the cliffhanger of the season. Like the jungle's chapter break. You move to a table where finds rest on foam trays. Little figurines stand in frozen conversation, round bellies, down-turned mouths, hands raised mid-gesture. One tray holds a modeled scene, tiny people arranged before upright celts. It echoes a famous deposit at La Venta, where 16 figurines faced 6 jade blades, like a council before a greenstone horizon. Were such miniatures snapshots of a real meeting, a myth retold in miniature, or a ritual rehearsal? Historians still argue whether these assemblies were political theater or cosmology in pocket-size form. In the next unit, a rectangle of darker soil yields the outline of a timber chamber. The air cools, and the crew moves with extra care. The tropics rarely preserve bone, yet the layout, the offerings, and the careful sealing speak clearly. Someone of rank rested here. A pendant emerges, jade, drilled and polished, followed by flecks of bright cinnabar the earth kept like a sigh. Notes slow, voices soften. Respect becomes another tool. Neutral voice places a marker on the map. There are 17 known colossal heads, recovered at 4 major sites: San Lorenzo, La Venta, Tres Zapotes, and Rancho La Cobata. The count matters because each face represents labor, logistics, and a name heavy enough to warrant stone. Dusk leans in. At the edge of camp, the magnetometry crew points at a screen where cool blues and warm reds bloom like shy stars. Anomalies, buried stones, fired floors, maybe another offering. A volunteer whispers that one day they'll find a hidden chamber lined with golden gears and crystal maps. You smile at the fringe flare, archaeology meets treasure novel, and file it under fun to imagine. Reality's wonders, jade masks under clay, water tunnels beneath plazas, are miraculous enough without secret engines waiting in the dark. Camp exhales as tools are counted and buckets washed. Notes gather on clipboards like migrating birds, then flock into order. Someone recites the annual charm. Dear funding spirits, please accept this offering of perfect field notes. Laughter rises, warm, a little frayed, and the jungle seems to approve. You stand at the trench once more before the tarps go down. The pit is a held breath, inverted architecture that will vanish when the earth returns to itself. You think about how often the Olmecs buried beauty on purpose, trusting that hidden splendor could still feed the world. The modern crew mirrors that trust, reveal, record, replace. It's a conversation across centuries where both sides agree that some things work best when the soil keeps the last word. On your walk back through the trees, fireflies pinprick the path like annotations in light. You picture the underworld of offerings glowing below, patient as stars in daylight, waiting for night to make their presence easy again. You whisper a thank you to the ground, absurd, maybe, but quietly satisfying. And the earth answers with a smell like cool iron and leaves. Behind you, tarps settle. Ahead, the dark opens. You carry the day's finds only in memory, which is fitting. The Olmec habit of burying riches has rubbed off. What matters most tonight feels sealed, safe, luminous, kept where no wind can touch it. The night air grows still, as if the jungle itself wants to hush you for what comes next. You return to the field of stone giants, their silhouettes etched against a sky powdered with stars. You stop before one colossal head, its broad nose shadowed, its lips firm, its helmet band catching the faint gleam of moonlight. The silence here is deeper than in the abandoned plazas. It's not emptiness, but expectation. These faces feel like riddles that know their answers will never be spoken aloud. Neutral voice lays down the anchor. Archaeologists have mapped 17 known colossal heads, each distinct, each quarried from basalt, and placed deliberately in ceremonial centers. That fact is solid, as heavy as the stones themselves. But what they mean, that is the puzzle that has kept generations circling. You step closer, brushing moss from the cheek of one. Its features seem so personal, almost photographic, and yet too much like a mask to be merely a portrait. Were these rulers immortalized in stone? Were they gods wearing human features? Or guardians, set like watchmen at the edge of plazas and ball courts? Historians still argue whether the heads are dynastic monuments, sacred idols, or cosmic gatekeepers anchoring ritual space. Here's a quirky tidbit. When the first colossal head was uncovered at Tres Zapotes in the 19th century, locals thought it was just an odd boulder. One farmer supposedly joked that it looked like a neighbor's grumpy uncle. Imagine stumbling over one of the most iconic artifacts in the Americas and casually saying, "Yep, That's Cousin Pedro. You circle to the back of the head, where rough tool marks remain. You run your hand across them, feeling the difference between surface polish and raw labor. It's like peeking behind the curtain of a theater. Front stage perfection, backstage grit. The heads speak as much about craftsmanship as about power, yet they never tell you their names. Another head looms nearby, slightly tilted, as though listening. You imagine it leaning closer to its companion, whispering secrets about battles, alliances, rituals long gone. If stone could gossip, you'd never sleep again. Instead, you're left with silence, which is somehow more haunting. You wander between them slowly, and each one greets you differently. One frowns with stern disapproval, another almost smirks, as though it knows something you don't. A third seems weary, like a ruler tired of carrying authority. No two are the same, and yet none can be explained. The moon climbs higher, shadows stretching across the plaza. You picture ancient ceremonies here, torches blazing, drums rolling, incense clouds thick, priests chanting before these colossal faces. What did the crowd see in those stone gazes? Blessing, warning, judgment. You can't decide. Historians still argue whether the heads were meant to stand alone or as part of larger ceremonial complexes. Pairs flanking courts, lines guiding processions, guardians at thresholds. Without written records, the debate echoes like footsteps in an empty hall. You kneel before one, staring into its carved eyes. You whisper a question. Who were you? The head answers with silence, a silence so dense it feels like stone pressing back into your chest. You almost laugh at yourself, realizing you've been waiting for a rock to talk. Then again, isn't that the game of history, leaning close to the past, hoping the stones will mutter a clue? A breeze moves through the clearing, and for a moment the faces almost shift. You blink, half expecting them to wink, but they don't. They remain exactly what they are. Eternal puzzles daring you to keep asking. You stand slowly, brushing dirt from your knees. Around you, the colossal heads remain planted like question marks too heavy to lift. They are mysteries preserved in basalt, challenges carved for anyone willing to wonder. And as you walk away, you realize that maybe their silence is the point. The Olmecs didn't leave you answers. They left you questions strong enough to survive the centuries. You linger among the stone faces one last time, the night deep around you. The jungle exhales, insects chant, and the colossal heads sit in their patient circle, refusing to blink. You trace your hand along a weathered cheek, and for a breath you feel the pulse of thousands of years pressing back. The air smells of wet earth, resin, and faint smoke from fires long gone. You realize you've walked through a civilization that shaped gods from stone and silence, then vanished, leaving only riddles behind. Neutral voice tucks in the final anchor. The Olmec civilization flourished between roughly 1500 and 400 BCE, and though their cities collapsed, their influence endured. Ball games, deities, symbols, and monumental art echoing into the Maya and Aztec worlds. That is what we know, steady and factual. But here's a quirky tidbit. When the heads were first photographed in the early 20th century, a few sensational newspapers claimed they had found proof of a lost race of stone giants. Headlines screamed about Atlantis and vanished continents. For a while, readers half expected one of the heads to stand up and start walking. It never did, of course, though part of you thinks the stones probably had a good laugh about it. Historians still argue whether the colossal heads represent rulers, gods, ancestors, or something beyond categories. They are both specific and universal, faces of individuals, yet silent symbols of power. Every scholar carries a different answer, and the heads, stoic, amused, simply wait. You walk to the center of the plaza, the heads arrayed like an audience, their down-turned lips calm in the starlight. You bow slightly, not to worship, but in respect. Then you straighten, smile faintly, and whisper your thanks. The heads don't reply, but the breeze shifts, carrying the scent of earth and water as though the land itself has accepted your gesture. You turn to leave. Behind you, the colossal faces fade back into shadow, guardians of questions, keepers of silence. Ahead lies only night and the gentle promise of dreams. And now, as the story softens, let yourself breathe slower. Picture the colossal heads resting quietly in their jungle clearings, moonlight silvering their brows, vines draping like gentle blankets across their helmets. The voices of history grow dim, and what remains is calm. The steady patience of stone, the whisper of leaves, the endless lull of rivers drifting to the sea. You lie back in your mind's eye, the earth cool beneath you, the stars above scattered like ancient offerings never buried. The colossal heads watch without judgment, silent companions for your rest. Their gazes are heavy, yes, but also comforting. Faces that have seen centuries pass and still remain unshaken. Each breath you take now feels like a paddle stroke on a calm river, steady, unhurried, guiding you deeper into stillness. Let your shoulders loosen, your thoughts slow, your eyelids drift lower. The jaguars of myth are asleep. The traders have tied up their canoes. The ball court lies silent under soft starlight. All the noise of the day has gone, leaving only quiet. The unanswered questions no longer press. They float away like fireflies rising from grass. You don't need answers tonight. You need only rest and the comfort of knowing that mystery is allowed to wait for another dawn. So ease yourself into the rhythm of sleep. Imagine the colossal heads leaning back into earth, their weight a promise of stability, their silence a song older than memory. Let that stillness wrap around you, a blanket woven from stone and time. The world grows softer now. The story fades into hush. Sweet sleep waits just beyond the next breath. The end, sweet dreams.